afternoon, everybody. I'd just like to say before I start, if any of you do need to leave and get water and drinks, please feel free to go at any point to go and get drinks and stuff. Okay? Thank you. Item 1, announcement by the Mayor and Chief Exec. There's nothing, no announcements there. Apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Smith?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have apologies from Councillor Kath Taylor, Vivian Lees-Hamilton, Lisa Holmes, Josh Sheard and Liz Smage will be a little bit late. She should be here in the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to give apologies for Councillor Kath Pinnock. She's tied up with an important bill at the House of Lords. Councillor Paola Davies for illness with COVID, and Councillor Anthony Smith for work reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sokol.
Mr. Mayor, apology from Councillor Elizabeth Reynolds, Councillor Sarva, Councillor Fran Perry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol. Councillor Lee Richards.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Apologies from Councillor Allison. Thank you.
Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Apologies from Councillors Charles Greaves and Paul White.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meeting of Annual Council held on 25th of May 2022 be approved as a correct record. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Please vote by show of hands. That's carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Members of any disclosable pecuniary interest which would prevent them from discussing or voting on any item, any item should disclose their interest now. Are there any interests to declare? No. Can I remind any members who have declared an interest to complete the form and submit to the clerk at the end of the meeting? Thank you. Item 5, petitions from members of the Council. Are there any petitions to be submitted? Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a petition that I've been handed by residents of Smithies Moor Rise and Smithies Moor Close, requesting Kirklees Council to alleviate their continued stress of the road being used as a rat run by introducing traffic calming measures. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Bolt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present a petition which I'm sure finds support on many sides of the chamber that's calling for fairer access to the planning system from residents with equality to developers, and I hope this can be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt. Are there any further petitions? Okay. In accordance with Council Procedure Rule 9.3, I direct that the subject matter of the petitions be referred to the appropriate service director for investigation. Item 6, deputations and petitions from members of the public. There are no deputations this evening. Okay. Are there any public petitions? Okay. Yeah. Item 7, public question time. Are there any public questions? No. Okay. Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In accordance with CPR 15.3, I'd like to bring forward the motions on item 16 on Islamophobia, item 17 on anti-Semitism, and item 18 on cost of living crisis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Seconded. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Scott. Thank you. Can I go to a vote? Show of hands. That's carried. Thank you. Yeah. Can we move to item 16?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to introduce this item. This item has been on the agenda for a while. Islamophobia is something that we face, many of people in this chamber will face personally or come across it on a regular basis. The definition of the Islamophobia all-party parliamentary group definition was developed on a cross-party basis. It wasn't any individual or a pressure group or a campaign group. The group was chaired by a Conservative MP and endorsed on a cross-party basis. The police, the CPS, councillors, members of the public and people of all faiths have all come together to look at this very, very serious issue. It's the product of research, consultation, interviews with academics, researchers and people with real lived life experiences on the issue. The findings of the inquiry have showed that 83% of Muslims agreed that Islam is compatible with British way of life. 94% of Muslims feel free to practice their religion in the United Kingdom. The committee also concluded that the story of Muslims in Britain was one of integration, shared values and patriotism. However, 70% of Muslims reported that they had experienced prejudice because of their religion. These include abuse, both physical and verbal, and also reported that the experience of prejudice was way, way beyond what they would have experienced if they were from a different background. These include people being held back to take up opportunities, although they have the talent. So how can a definition help this council, and how can the definition help us? The fact that without a definition, the bar is lowered and the profile of the issue is non-existent. We see stereotypes and caricatures being repeated that create hate on a regular basis. I urge members to read the report to see how Islamophobia affects people's lives, and also people who share my faith of Islam. The definition matters to us all. As a public body delivering services to hundreds of thousands of people, it's vital that we treat everyone with respect and fairness. We hold ourselves to the highest possible standards of public life, and that's why it's so important that we adopt the definition tonight. In Kirklees, it will help our policy and decision making and make us more accountable to the communities we serve. Any form of racism degrades humanity. It creates a society where people don't get on because of what they are, because of what they believe in and not what they are. It normalizes the kind of behavior we simply don't tolerate in every other aspect of our lives. So once again, Mr. Mayor, I hope that the full council gets behind this and votes on this motion. And let's take a stand against prejudice and join with organisations across the country who have adopted this all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Is that seconded? Councillor Lawson? Thank you. Are there any comments on this motion? Councillor Mather? Sorry, Councillor Taylor. It popped up on my screen a bit later.
So I would say my experience, all my life I've lived by abiding the rules, putting my head down and working hard, ignoring differences which divide and working towards what is known as being inclusive, being kind and having compassion. What I have experienced recently, over the past couple of years especially, that Islamophobia is rife. We are moving into that space we don't want to get to. We know what happens in our recent past. Our history demonstrates that. Treblinka, we celebrated. We know what happened. We know what happened during the Second World War. We have to be ever so careful not to go into that space. As a member of the Employment Tribunal, definitions and frameworks are key to ensuring that justice is seen to be done and is experienced, the lived experience is acknowledged. So this definition, I agree, is cross-party and it's inclusive. As members of the council, a public service body, all citizens must believe that they get an equal say, an equal service, an equal outcome. Surely to God, that's why we're all here. As public servants, elected politicians, we want to unite, and that visible difference has to be put aside, because somehow that is what labels us most. So walking down the street, nobody's bothered whether I pay my taxes, whether I'm educated, whether I'm a councillor, a cabinet member. They don't care because they can label me as I walk down the street. As a Muslim woman, if I picked it up and put this across over my head, is something that they can label me. And what we need to do is get past the dress, the outward signals, and think, if we are a democracy, we're a democracy which believes in inclusivity, which believes in our common good, which believes in compassion. And if we say we are the older of the democracies and we allow all faiths to practice in a safe inclusive manner, we shouldn't even be here. But we need to be in this space because that's a lived experience. Somebody who's 50% of my family is white. My children are of dual heritage. They will feel it. All the other people walking down the street feel it. And all members of this council need to hear and come together and vote this definition in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mothers. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I welcome this opportunity to comment on this motion and share the heartfelt sentiments that sit behind it. It rightly points out that discrimination or hatred, however that manifests itself, is abhorrent. I welcome the reference in the motion to the Equality Act of 2010 as well. But it's here that my worries arise. The definition as defined by the APPG is actually incompatible with the definition of race within the Act, which is in terms of colour, nationality and national or ethnic origins. I'm sure that Councillor Pandor is well aware of this when bringing forward this proposal, and his intentions here was plain for all to see earlier this year. At this council, we rightly talk about community cohesion and the need for all of us to work collaboratively to bring people together, to focus on what we have in common and not focus on our differences. But sadly, when it suits their electoral purpose, it is Councillor Pandor's Labour Party which acts in a partisan way, pitting one group against another. We saw this in the Batley and Spen by-election, with leaflets which tried to suggest the Conservative Party was associated with the Indian government, using a photo of the two Prime Ministers, suggesting people of Muslim faith and heritage should vote against the Conservatives for this reason. We saw it again this May, when a councillor who I have a good working relationship with and who I respect, tweeted about all Conservatives being Islamophobic. And as a Conservative who works across communities and has friends from within the Muslim community, I take personal offence at that smear. And of course, it was purely to seek political advantage. So I say to Councillor Pandor and the Labour Party, let's work together to tackle injustice, hatred and discrimination. But to do so, you need to stop playing partisan and divisive politics when it suits you. I also have concerns about the definition of who is or is not defined as a Muslim and who gets to determine that definition. I am fully aware of the dispute between, if I may say it, the mainstream Muslim faiths and the Ahmadiyya Muslims. I'm no imam, so I'm in no position to arbitrate here, but there needs to be a clear and narrow definition. This should focus on, as the Coalition Against Islamophobia guidelines do, on addressing bigotry directed at individuals and avoid censoring debate or freedom of expression on religion. It must also take into account examples of intra-Muslim hatred that have occurred towards those who may wish to speak freely or express themselves differently. And in this context, I do include the antipathy towards Ahmadiyya Muslims. So I will not be able to support the adoption of a loosely worded definition as drafted, which is incompatible with the Equality Act of 2010. And it also leaves that huge question over how we define Muslim or Muslimness, and importantly, who gets to define that. Having said all of this, I do think that the work of the Coalition Against Islamophobia is very helpful in articulating how Islamophobia manifests itself, and I would hope that as a council we can all come together to tackle discrimination, hatred or racism wherever we find it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Lukic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anti-Muslim hatred is unreservedly and emphatically condemned across this chamber. Unfortunately, this particular motion is fundamentally flawed. and poses damaging implications. By contrast, the definition of anti-Semitism that we're considering in the next motion is much more focused and specific in referring to expressions of hatred, and I believe that is why it is much more broadly adopted around the country. There is known to be an increase in recorded hate crimes overall, which is generally understood to be driven by improvements in crime recording by the police and growing awareness of hate crime leading to improved identification of these offences. But even though there has been an overall 18% increase in recorded hate crimes over 2 years in the most recent figures, when you focus on religious hate crimes, the statistics actually show the opposite trend. This includes those hate crimes targeting Muslims, where there has been a 23% decrease over the same time period. In the year 2018-19, there were 3,530 religiously aggravated offences against Muslims. In 2019-20, there were 3,089, and in 2020-21, there were 2,703. And that's against a backdrop of overall increases in recorded hate crimes, generally. Of course, one hate crime is one too many, and it is urgent that we continue working to root out anti-Muslim hatred. Unfortunately, though, this motion is clearly misleading to suggest that the number of recorded offences has been growing. Moving on to the all-party parliamentary group, it's important to remember that an all-party parliamentary group is simply an informal, self-selecting group of MPs that share a common interest in an issue. APPGs have no official status within Parliament, although of course they do represent an example of cross-party working. On their definition for Islamophobia that this motion seeks to promote, what stands out to me is that the definition is much too loose and does not give any distinction between anti-Muslim prejudice and criticism of Islamic beliefs and practices. It's easy to see how this particular definition could be twisted to label any criticism of anything that can be regarded as an expression of Muslimness as a type of racism. I myself have previously brought a petition to this council signed by thousands of our residents against the use of meat from non-stun slaughter in local schools and have continued to question cabinet members about this issue since I was elected. I'm deeply concerned that some who might like to suppress religious criticism could weaponise the APPG's definition to label these efforts as racist. A definition as vague as this can even be abused to shield religious prejudice towards other groups, which would directly undermine our efforts to tackle hate crime. Many dozens of figures, both Muslim and non-Muslim, including journalists, academics, religious and civil liberties leaders, historians, politicians, and counter-terror officials have called for the definition, the APPG's definition, not to be adopted for reasons such as this. The freedom to critique religious or cultural beliefs and practices is a fundamental cornerstone of democratic societies. The freedom of expression is enshrined in human rights law, and we have to be incredibly careful not to inadvertently compromise that freedom or put this council in a position where we could be in conflict with it. The leader of the council might want to put his phone down. Well, it's up to him if he doesn't. I don't think he'd expect that from any of us. In this country, we have a well-established legal framework against religiously aggravated hate crime. There's nothing further to be gained by adopting such a problematic and unworkable definition for Islamophobia, and doing so would be counterproductive to fighting some forms of hate crime. I consider that the organisations that have adopted this definition have done so without properly considering the implications. This council should not rush into doing the same, and any members who are on their phone rather than listening to others talk should think about what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Anwar.
Mr. Mayor, just want to give some insight into these Islamophobic attacks. Anti-Muslim hate crimes have been rocketed across Kirklees. Islamophobic attacks have doubled since 2015, and there have been a spate of incidents in Huddersfield, Holmfirth, Dewsbury and Batley. There should be events held across Kirklees to raise awareness of the problem and look at ways of tackling it. The majority of offences have been recorded by the police as people causing racially or religiously aggravated public fear, alarm or distress. And there have also been cases of harassments and as far as assault. Nationally, there has been a dramatic increase in hate crime, and in West Yorkshire, the police recorded over 390 since 2015. I hope everybody gets behind this motion and passes it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anwar. Councillor Butt.
Good evening, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Islamophobia is a prejudice, aversion, hostility or hatred towards Muslims and encompasses any distinctive exclusion, restriction, discrimination or preference against Muslims that has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural or any other field of public life. That's a quote from the Muslim Council of Britain. Now I'll talk about what I've written myself. Islamophobia, in line with anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, sexism and any other forms of hatred and discrimination, is a tool used to gain and maintain power. It's inextricably linked with socioeconomic factors and frequently reflects the underlying inequalities within society. Islamophobia is a prejudice, aversion, hostility or hatred towards Muslims and encompasses any distinction, exclusion, restriction or preference against Muslims that the purpose of effect or nullifying or impairing recognition, employment or exercise. Now, as such, Islamophobia is demonstrated and articulated through speech, writing, behaviors, structures, policies, legislation, and activities that work to control, regulate, or exclude Muslim participation within social, civic, economic, or political life, or which embody hatred, vilification, stereotyping, abuse, or violence directed at Muslims. Now, while criticism of Islam is within legitimate realms of debate and free speech, is not in itself Islamophobic. It may become Islamophobic if the arguments presented are used to justify or encourage vilification, stereotyping, dehumanization, demonization, or exclusion of Muslims. For example, by using criticism of religion to argue that Muslims are collectively evil or violent. We had thought that the offensive shortening of the word Pakistani had been left in the 1980s, and I'm sure colleagues know which four-letter word I'm talking about. It's the racialization of people that now the word Muslim has replaced that four-letter word with Muslim, and it's rooted in racism. Councillor Taylor mentioned that it's a loose definition and that there has to be a distinction between that and racism. Actually, people will attack people. By attack, I mean in writing or in speech or maybe physically, because they assume somebody is Muslim by the way they look. A definition will set the standard for how we judge words and actions. Councillor Lukic, maybe the decrease is down to people not bothering to report hate crimes anymore because they see nothing happening. Maybe people have stopped reporting them. That's why there's been a decrease. Not because society has stopped with the Islamophobia, wherever it was. No one is saying Muslims don't want you to have your right to criticize Islam legitimately, but there needs to be parameters on this. Finally, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or any other bigotry is a stain on humanity, and it takes society as a whole to change thinking and attitudes. And I urge colleagues to support both the Islamophobia and anti-Semitism motions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt.
Very quick point of personal explanation based on what Councillor Butt was saying about what I said about a decrease in recorded religiously aggravated hate crimes against Muslims. he said that might be due to people giving up on reporting them, when what I said was there'd been a decrease in recorded religiously aggravated hate crimes against Muslims, even though there's been a general increase in recorded hate crimes overall. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Lucky. Councillor Hussain.
I'm quite short. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We all agree that any form of hate crime is unacceptable. Therefore, I was pleased to see this motion being supported by the Labour administration. The definition of Islamia put forward by the APPG, as been highlighted already, is Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Therefore, it is vital to understand and acknowledge that people have been attacked and nearly lost their lives or even lost their lives as a direct result of Islamophobia. It doesn't just happen overnight. In 2013, Mohammed Salim in Birmingham. In 2016, Mohsin Ahmed in Rotherham. 2017, Zainab Hussain in Leicester. And 2017 again, Makram Ali in London. And I'm sure there's many more. And while there were some comments made about reporting, I did agree with Councillor Butt on the point that sometimes people are afraid of reporting, but that does not mean that the crime is not happening. So imagine an iceberg. What we see is at the tip of it, above the sea level. However, the iceberg goes much deeper than that. The structures of Islamophobia goes much deeper than that. Below the iceberg, we see marginalisation, exclusion, stereotypes, discrimination. Those are the foundations before we even reach the point of assaults and physical attacks and verbal attacks. So the point I'm making is we may not always see what is going on at the bottom of the iceberg. However, we know that the foundations I mentioned earlier enables and maintains Islamophobic hate crimes. So we must appreciate that the structural Islamophobia is the root of all problems. As leading members in our community must be fully behind in protecting our residents in all areas of their life so they can fully contribute to civic and public life. However, it was deeply disappointing to note that the motion was not supported by some in this chamber. There's no explanation or excuses for this. Irrespective of any faith, all lives matter. I'm pleased to note that the Council will work with communities and all relevant stakeholders to both raise awareness of this issue surrounding Islamophobia and to challenge and tackle the instances of Islamophobia. I'm also pleased to note that the Council will invite to the Government urging the adaptation of the APBG definition of Islamophobia too. In conclusion, we do not need another loss of life, and we should not play politics with people's lives. By supporting this motion, we are protecting people from hate crime, harm, but also allowing people to flourish in all society, making it more inclusive for everyone. Therefore, tonight, I'm not only supporting the Islamophobia motion, I will also be supporting the anti-Semitism motion too, on the basis of what I've just explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Patterson.
I just have a very simple question, really, which is, why does Councillor Taylor think that this is at odds with the Equality Act 2010? It's protect faith and religion as a protected characteristic identified as part of that act. So it beggars belief that it's not, that he believes that it's not, it's at odds with it. But even if that were so, this is about Islamophobia. It is about people's lives and not about politics, as Yusra's just said. And we do need this protection from hate crime for all our communities. I say I'm staggered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Taylor.
Just a point of personal explanation. If you actually read the Equality Act, it does give a definition, and I read that definition out, and I'm just trying to find it here in my notes. It defines race in terms of colour, nationality, and national or ethnic origins. That is the definition in the Act. So if Councillor Patterson didn't understand that, perhaps that will be helpful. So point of explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Taylor, there's a lot of whataboutery in your arguments. There is prejudice across different groups, and we should unite and do everything we can to stamp out all prejudice against all people. This definition applies to all the different sects of Muslims, whether they're Ahmadiyyan, Shia or Sunni, or decide to be independent Muslims with their totally own, kind of established definition of what it means. Now, in terms of political divisions, if you supported this motion, logic says then we wouldn't have that political division. It wouldn't exist. But the Conservative Party have an appalling record of Islamophobia, rife within party ranks. Tory councillors who have shared derogative posts calling for Muslims to be deported, described Saudis as sand peasants, and shared material comparing Asian people to dogs have all been quietly reinstated. And this sends a message out to the public that it's acceptable, and it's okay. But this comes as no surprise, given the track record of your soon-to-be former leader, where he likened Asian women wearing the hijab to letterboxes. And we do know that the incidence of hate crime against Muslims increased rapidly after that incident. So what we say here in these chambers, what government officials and elected members say and do, has an impact on society. Now, I suffered a lot of Islamophobia prior to moving to Huddersfield as a child. Yeah, I would walk down the street with my mum, and I find this really difficult to talk about because we would be subjected to racial and Islamophobic abuse in the street publicly. And my mum used to quietly hurry us along and just say nothing because she couldn't do anything. And that's probably one of the reasons why I'm here today. And that's probably why I'm interested in politics. Because no child should be subjected to that. And those experiences become deeply rooted in our psychology, and they can affect us for the rest of our lives. And throughout the lifespan, they can affect our choices. They can make us feel alienated or different and fear. You have to understand the impact that will have on a child and their future prospects. So I've got nothing further more to say except to urge the local Tory party to get on board with this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Right to reply, Councillor Pando.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was hoping that the debate didn't go the way it started by Councillor John Taylor and Councillor Lucic. And just for information, Councillor Lucic, I wasn't ignoring you. I was just making sure that my response would be factual. And for you to stand up there and criticise me on something as important as this is completely below the belt, and I'll explain why. Firstly, when Naheed stood here, and she stood up as a member of my cabinet, and then when she put the scarf on, what went through your heads? What went through your minds? I'll tell you what went through my mind. The many, many women who actually quite freely are proud to dress the way they do, and it completely puts a blight and it completely puts a negative impression on people like the comments that John Taylor made. John, I'm really disappointed in the comments you made. I thought I would have expected a little bit better from you, and I'll tell you why. First and foremost, and I think Muz picked up on this, just before a leadership contest, Boris Johnson openly had a go at women who belong to my faith, calling them letterboxes. And this is no joke. The number of women in Kirklees, the number of women in Batley that got abused for what they were wearing, the number of calls I got in that time wasn't a joke, wasn't fabricated, it wasn't made up, it was real. It made me so angry. I can't express how I felt. Do you know how many women get attacked purely because of the way they dress? Do you know how many people get attacked purely because of their faith? It doesn't matter what faith, but just because they look different. A lot of the statistics that I've recorded is completely below the radar. And I'll give you one example, which is a blight on our democracy. Nusrat Ghani, we all heard of her as an MP, a minister. She actually was abused by her own colleagues in Parliament because of her being a Muslim. And this is what she said. Some of her own colleagues made the comments as that my Muslimness makes me get in a position where my colleagues feel uncomfortable because she's a Muslim. And I feel that that is a big testimony in terms of issues that we are facing. And I'll come on to why the Tory party needs to actually step up to this. There's no point in covering it up and hiding behind something that doesn't exist, as allegedly. She came out, and when you speak to her, she actually said these things with pure conviction, and she actually felt that this is actually completely unacceptable. And she actually said this is the tip of the iceberg. Now, this is not me saying it as a Labour leader. This is a Tory minister saying this. Also, Hope Not Hate, you probably heard about Hope Not Hate. They do a lot of campaigning around all forms of inequality and discrimination. And they carried out a survey, and you can check it out on the internet. 47% of Conservative Party members feel that there is an issue with people who belong to the same faith that I do, Islam, being Muslims. And also, in 2019, 15 Conservative councillors were suspended for racist and Islamophobic comments. Now, I don't want to politicize this issue, but these are real issues that we have to tackle. These are real issues that we have to talk about. And if anybody who's playing politics in this, John, it's not me. If I wanted to take politics on this, I would have made sure that we brought this to the agenda before the full council meeting, just before the election, but I deliberately didn't. A number of councillors came to me and said, Shabir, we are surprised that you didn't have a debate about this before the election. And I said, no, I didn't, because I didn't want to make a political issue out of it. Elections are over, but they are serious issues that we face and we must tackle, because everybody in this council chamber has a responsibility. Everybody has got to step up, and inclusivity across the piece is very, very important. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pandal. We'll now go to a vote. Please vote now. Show of hands, please. That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On a point of order, I was wondering if you could guide us on appropriate use of electronic devices as well as the talking. It wasn't actually just the leader of the council, though it was particularly distracting. And it probably would have been better if he'd waited till I'd finished speaking. But there were multiple members in the front rows especially that I think were potentially using devices inappropriately and not paying attention to the meeting.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Lukic, but obviously I'm watching the meeting, so it's down to me to manage that. Thank you.
issued us with electronic devices. The council are seeking us to move towards less paper. So when we're researching something, and I was looking up issues which the leader was talking about, I was looking at the phone to make sure I was getting the facts right. So it's not a matter of discourtesy, it's a matter of making sure that if we're researching something, members may have tablets, members may have telephones, we're getting the facts. The alternative is we come here with a library full of paper, which then somebody would complain, you're reading through your papers while I'm talking. You can't satisfy all the people all the time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bott. And I can see everything from top of here as well, so I know who's doing what. So thank you for that. Thank you. Next item. Item 17. Motion under Council Procedure Rule 14 as to the adoption of the definition of anti-Semitism as set out by International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, I'm pleased to introduce this motion. It's a cross-party motion, and all the groups have signed up to it, so I really appreciate that. It's a powerful demonstration of this council commitment to expose and tackle all forms of racism and anti-Semitism in this case. I'm proud that this motion on anti-Semitism has full support, like I said, and it's another example of how in Kirklees we have so much more in common than what divides us. The motion is a symbol of unity, and it's really important that we actually show that unity, but unity in itself is not enough, Mr. Mayor. Because anti-Semitism continues to blight our society. In fact, last year was the worst ever for reported incidents of anti-Semitism in Britain. That's why adopting the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition is so important to us and the Council. It sets out clearly how we define anti-Semitism. It's a guide for all of us to know how to recognise and expose racism and anti-Semitism. It's just not about threats and thuggery that feed anti-Semitism. The kind of racism that spreads poison and hatred is quite a cancer that we must all combat and tackle. That's why we need to unite behind a common understanding of the problem. This definition will help us do that. But it's one thing to define the problem, and that's why tonight I'm asking the Council to go further. It's up to us all as representatives of our communities, not just to be vigilant and knowledgeable. I'm asking for you to call out racism, anti-Semitism, and challenge it directly and head on. Tonight's motion is a call for action. Stand up and be counted, and fight against anti-Semitism. I put inclusion at the heart of my agenda for Kirklees. That commitment means I want the Council to stand shoulder to shoulder with all the diverse communities that make Kirklees such an amazing place. The adoption of the definition on anti-Semitism is just a marker and a beginning. That's why I urge everybody in this council chamber to send a strong message of unity with our Jewish community. And I hope that we can all support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pando. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor. We have no problem supporting this motion. It's an internationally recognised definition. It complies with legislation. And we have reviewed this motion as we review all others to make sure that we can support it on points of legality and with some scrutiny that it purports to do, that it will do what it purports to do. I'm glad this motion has been brought forward. I'm sorry to hear the remarks of Councillor Pandor in the previous debate. I'm afraid that when he accuses people of bringing politics into these things, he was the first to do it in that debate, which is a shame. I also hope this has been brought forward for the right reasons. We can agree this for the right reasons. My fear is this was brought forward in order to give political cover to the Labour Party to bring forward the previous motion, which I think was done so in order to stoke political division and not to heal it. Putting that aside, Mr. Mayor, I do welcome this motion. I second it unreservedly. We will give it our support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Are there any comments on this motion? Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Mayor. So I stand here and I'm legally looking at a definition which is a framework which allows you to navigate and provide services as we should. Councillor Hall, I cannot imagine which way it would have made more palatable the former motion if this went before. Would it have been any easier? Because I'm here, I don't want divisions. I want everything called out. And I work with protected characteristics, and everybody should feel safe. Just as in this motion, the Labour administration has done right. Whether it went before the Islamophobia or after, it doesn't dilute anything from any of the motions that we're talking about. So I am pleased to say, whether my group was supporting it or not, I would always support this because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. Right to reply, Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, David, for them comments. I wish you could have actually spoke on the previous motion because, if anything, you're the one who is talking up division. I sincerely hope that you could have supported our motion on Islamophobia because, once again, to me, making sure all forms of discrimination and inclusivity is actually at the heart of everything we do. I don't want to carry on the debate too much, Mr. Mayor, but I just thought that was a cheap political shot, Dave, even from your standards. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Please can we now vote by show of hands? That's carried. Thank you. Item 18, motion under Council Procedure Rule 14 as to the cost of living crisis. Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In this motion, the Liberal Democrat group are asking this council to declare a cost of living emergency. We've done that recently, many times over recent years. We've declared a climate emergency. We know that the COVID pandemic was not just an emergency for our country, but it's a global emergency. And this is an emergency in no less a sense than those others. And we think it's really important for this council and councils throughout the country to take a real concern, because we all know that the tools that central government have are not sufficient to meet the needs of all our communities and everybody who lives there. And we also know that countries that have a fairer distribution of resources tend to cope with this sort of crisis better and more effective and better for everybody than those that are not as equitable. It cannot be acceptable to anyone in the 21st century that people are reliant on food banks to feed themselves, let alone that anybody has to make the choice between heating and eating. I also think we should not be selfish about this. It's not just in Britain where it's a problem, but it's throughout the world. But in a country that still has the 4th, 5th largest economy in the world, it is something that we know that we have collectively the resources to deal with. What this motion also emphasises is this is not just about the individuals that today, tomorrow and in the future are going to have to choice about how they use the limited resources they have. And we also know that things are going to get worse as we go along. We know that the rising cost of both gas and electricity is going to seriously affect community groups who are trying to heat their buildings, voluntary community sector organisations that heat their offices, or they have rising expenses. It's also going to hit the businesses in Kirklees that employ local people, and that's significant as well. So we need a broad focus. The motion recognises the high impact of inflation. And as I look round at the council chamber, it will be the older members here who remember the impact of inflation in the 1970s and the choices that we had all to make then. And thankfully, for decades, that's been a distant memory. But there are going to be those who, part of the problem of this is actually how do you meet your daily needs when the costs of things are going up. And again, I'm talking to a business person this afternoon who's fitting windows and actually said the cost of glass has doubled in the last couple of months. And then it's not just the food, the heating, it's actually the resources that people need to ply their trade. Energy, food, fuel, services are all rising. We are often told that we are all in it together. But too often, those who have the least resources come off worst. And those that have the most do not always make the sacrifices that they should. Those sacrifices that would be to everybody's benefit. This should also not be just about handouts or thinking about it that way. It should be about structural changes to tackle poverty. And that's a word that we bandy around too much. One of the opportunities for this local authority and authorities throughout the country is to have a better understanding of the local economy. The costs that face people to get to work, the costs on those businesses, the cost of shopping. For those people who are close to cheap supermarkets, it might be easier to meet their needs to those who cannot afford to get on the bus, haven't got a car, and that. So we need to take this opportunity to understand things better. Some of the things in the motion I think we all agree with. I would hope we do. The reduction in VAT is one of those taxes. All of us pay taxes. All of us pay VAT because there's VAT on fuel, gas and electricity. There's VAT on fuel. There's VAT on most of the things that we consider to be essentials and not luxury. And Liberal Democrats believe that actually cutting that would actually provide £600 to every household in the country, and it would happen directly, and it will also be balanced out over time. I am concerned, we've had a little bit of a discussion about politicising things. One of the things that concern Liberal Democrats is where we politicise taxation, and we use that as a way of, to make cheap political points, rather than understanding the effects that taxation has on people's employment and the places where they live, and how taxation can be used as a resource to benefit everybody. And we need to deal with that. We need to take the opportunity of a better understanding of our local economy, where people live, where people shop for the basics of life. Poverty is an emotive word, and we do need to understand its complexities and its sophistication. We need to know that children are in poverty, and I believe in West Yorkshire, over 30% of children are living in poverty at the moment, and that is not acceptable. Our motion suggests some of the things that we could do about it, and we believe that the local authority is very well placed to help local people through the way that it supports individuals, communities and businesses, but also the way it can actually improve the insulation in people's homes, access to renewable energies which will cut directly gas bills and electricity bills. And we think there's opportunities because council still has access to borrowing that individuals and poorer households do not. There is a danger that once again there will be more said than done. Our group hopes that in supporting this motion we are all committing ourselves to actions that protect the most vulnerable, but also help everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mattington. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Lawson. We have also a Labour Group amendment. So, Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're told that the cost of living crisis is a global shock to the system. It's a crisis not of our government's making, its causes are outside of their control. Now, it is true that the current crisis has some significant drivers outside the UK. But what is also true is that we as a country are less able to respond to it due to the fragility of our economy and our society. And only recently, the Resolution Foundation published their annual Living Standards Audit. UK household income growth between 2007 and 2018 fell behind the rest of Europe, with only Greece and Cyprus behind us. Ireland grew by 6%, France 10%, Germany 19%. We fell by 2%. This has resulted in the average UK household being 8,800 poorer than similar households in France and Germany. All countries are struggling at the moment during this crisis, but after 15 years of income stagnation, we are the hardest hit and the least resilient. We are in fact stagnation nation, a toxic combination of low growth, low productivity and high inequality. Amongst EU countries, only Bulgaria is more unequal than us. We warned of a recession, consumer confidence is going through the floor, sterling is falling, unemployment is forecast to increase. And by the way, if you happen to be unlucky and unemployed in Britain, job seekers' allowance is the lowest on record, 13% of average pay. In Sweden, you get 80% of your previous pay. That's how fragile we are. So we have the Tory party, the natural party of government, the party that tells us they know how to manage our finances as a country and can tell us and instruct us on how to move forward in that direction. So what do we hear for contenders for the Prime Minister's position? Cuts to income and corporation tax, and of course, resultant cuts in public spending. Because somehow they've got to pay for these giveaways. Now, I've already talked about the fragility of our society, and potentially we may have a Tory Prime Minister pushing through, once again, severe cuts to public spending. We've been through that. We know we lost 200 million in Kirklees. We know what's happened to health, education, police, and I could go on and on. Those who need these services the most, as we know, are affected the most. Children's life chances are damaged, sometimes beyond repair, and daily misery for millions who live in poverty. These are the people who will pay the most for these Tory tax giveaways. And this is a real-life personal crisis for individuals. It's about mothers in despair and not being able to feed their children, to go to charities for school uniforms, and see their dignity ripped away from them and their families. But interestingly, they told us their fault. They need to take responsibility. They need to start budgeting and need to start cooking meals at 30 pence and also work more hours and, do you know what, get a better job. All advice from Tory MPs. And it's ironic to see our current Prime Minister and ex-cabinet members, when we talk of responsibility, take no responsibility for their actions. So this motion, our amendment and the composite motion, certainly, clearly we support as a Labour group. And what it does also show is what we as a council and administration have been trying to do to provide support to our citizens and our ongoing commitment to our citizens during this crisis. But we cannot mitigate all of the impact that we're seeing in this crisis. Therefore, we've laid out, alongside with the Lib Dems, a number of demands on government which will help us and help our citizens, hopefully, to mitigate some of these ill effects. But it isn't the full picture, and there is a broader discussion to be had, and we do need to lobby even further for this government to start implementing...
Councillor Davies, time is up.
Okay, I'll round up. If you with one final thought, a really good example of government intervention. Just look across the channel and look at state intervention in France. The state-controlled utility EDF capped energy prices to 4% earlier this year. What happened in this country? 54%. I move the amendment to the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Panda. I've got you down. Councillor Panda. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Are there any comments on the motion, which we have got quite a few? So, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I'm about to say really could apply to both the unamended motion and the proposed amendment, so I'll say it all in one hit. What I would ask is that members present, please listen to what I actually say and not what you think I say. My start point is to look at this and see that we're declaring another emergency. And the problem with that is that it becomes potentially quite vacuous, in that if we keep declaring emergencies, they just become words. So, looking at both proposals here, what I've done is I've drilled down into what the actual actions are. And the amendment goes further, actually, so I'm going to talk to that first. The amendment requires two things. It instructs the Chief Executive to write a letter to Theresa Coffey. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure that it will really change the lives of people in Kirklees, but we are here to try and represent the people of Kirklees and make things better for them. And if this council genuinely thinks that a letter to Theresa Coffey is going to help, then we can do that. And secondly, it requires the Cabinet to continue to work in partnership, etc., etc. So we're having a meeting and we're discussing a motion, the outcome of which is that we're going to say to the Cabinet, please keep doing what you should be doing already. Okay. So nothing there actually improves anything for anybody in practical terms in Kirklees. Now, turning to the start of the text, where the council notes that Ofgem increased energy prices and so forth and so forth. I'm actually fundamentally in agreement with this here, that I think that the job that Ofgem does is pretty bad, to be honest. I'm not a fan of state control of food prices in any form, whether it be turnips, tractors, energy, or anything like that. So I'd actually like to see the price cap go and let the market decide. I agree, the increase in national insurance shouldn't happen. This motion actually doesn't go far enough. In my view, the letter to Theresa Coffey should be calling for some fairly brutal reductions in national insurance. It talks about the government having suspended the triple lock on the pension. Now, I may be wrong on this, and perhaps somebody with a phone can check this for me, but I thought that had been reinstated. I may be wrong on that. Again, I'm not entirely sure on that. In relation to the windfall tax, the point I would make there is that no nation has ever taxed itself into prosperity. And therefore, actually, what we should be doing is we should be reducing taxes across the board. A one-off hit and then splurging the money actually only has a one-off impact. And I don't think that's a very sensible way to spend the money, the tax take that we have anyway. And on a slightly philosophical point, the motion is drafted to say that this council believes, okay, it believes. Now, a council at law is a legal personality, in the same way that a limited company is a legal personality. it can't express a belief. It can't have a religion to follow. It can't believe in things like that. BP, any other company, Barclays Bank, etc., doesn't believe things. So conceptually, this is fundamentally flawed. So whilst I appreciate the desire to do something and to signal by way of saying that there's another emergency, the desire to signal virtue and to say that we're doing something, actually this doesn't do anything. And for me, if we were to actually want to try and say something to the government, and it's something that I do regularly take every opportunity to say to them, is we should be cutting these taxes, we should be increasing tax thresholds, we should be putting money back in the hard-working, in the pockets of the hard-working people within Kirklees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Cooper?
One does not simply declare a cost of living emergency. There's a lot to commend in the Lib Dem motion and the Labour amendment. But there's too much focus on asking government to do things when there is so much more that we can do ourselves. Councillor Marchington, in his speech, made good reference to insulating homes and use of renewables to address the cost of living crisis. Unfortunately, these are not mentioned in their motion or in the Labour amendment, and they're good things to do. You know, we should be looking at these things. Yes, we need to insulate more homes and enable more to use renewable energy to power and heat their homes. That is why the Green Party proposed the economically and environmentally sustainable energy-sprung method of retrofitting homes with insulation. Councils such as the London Borough of Ealing, Nottingham City Council, and quite a number of London boroughs are actually using the energy-sprung method to insulate homes whereby they have had whole wall and roof units complete with solar panels and heat source which have provided net zero energy homes to the people who live in them, drastically reducing their fuel bills. The council also needs to dust off the very successful green proposal and award-winning proposal from 2008, where we used a second charge on the property to allow Kirklees residents to install solar panels, the recharge scheme. This was basically where we utilised the value of people's homes and wrapped that up into a second charge, a loan, tying the interests within that, and that meant that people would basically only have to pay for the solar panels when they sold their home. It was only stopped really because at the time the feed-in tariff was actually providing free solar panels as well at the same time. That's finished now, so now is the time to dust off the recharge scheme and utilise those values. We also need to look at things like public transport. What can we do at a time when many people on low incomes are trying to get around, to go to work, to shop, to get about, who simply can't afford a car? And give them those options. We're having 30% plus of people, of services which are being cut. And you can bet that those public transport costs are going to rise as well. So what is it we can do? We can complain to government, and yes, we should do, because there's a lot wrong. And there's a real inequity in terms of the way that cars are supported against public transport. And let's not get into the north and the south. But there are things we can do. Again, if we look at Nottingham City Council, Leicester City Council, Scottish local authorities, other places, they are now looking at the employer's workplace parking levy as a way of drawing in resources to help fund sustainably public transport. Nottingham City Council brings in £9 million each and every year from the employer's workplace parking levy, which has enabled them to improve public transport, improve active travel, and make a real difference to enable people on low incomes to get about. So we need to have less hand-wringing about cost of living and more action. And that's why I'm proposing some of the things I've put here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Goshik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to say what actually the people are struggling. So it is a crazy situation when the Tory government is ignoring the cost of living emergency. People cannot afford to pay their gas and electric bills. The £400 help already announced for most households has already been defrauded by projecting energy cost coming next month. The defining silence from this Tory government, including its leadership candidate, is unbelievable. They keep promising ever higher tax cuts, but tax cuts does not help the most vulnerable in our communities. It does not help those on state pensions or those on universal credit. Even the parents are struggling to afford the accommodations for their children. So I urge members to demand this government act immediately to counter skyrocketing bills. We need actions, not words. What they have done so far is not nearly enough. So I support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Koshik. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I start by offering, I think I speak for everyone here, my sympathies and condolences to you and your family for the passing of your father, particularly after the last meeting in the mayor-making ceremony. I think a sight any father would be proud of there. I'm also proud to be part of Kirklees as well. With these two motions that have been adopted earlier on in the meeting, and with the fantastic Kirklees Pride event we saw the past weekend as well, I think we're a very inclusive area, and I hope on the back of this meeting we'll unite in tackling discrimination across all parties. I would like to support the motion and the amendment proposed by Councillor Davies. Can I suggest the Chief Executive writes to all members of the Conservative Parliamentary Party? You never know which one might be the Secretary of State, do you? But in all seriousness, I think we see the drama over the past few days and week down in Parliament, and the eye-watering severance packages some of those ministers have received on the back of that. We cannot escape the cost of living crisis that we're facing at the moment. When we shop, when we fill up our cars, when we pay our bills, the actions proposed in the motion and the amendment will immediately support the most vulnerable in Kirklees and the wider country to weather the storm of this economic storm that we're currently in the eye of. I think the councils of all parties across the country have the opportunity, even the responsibility, to demand this government stops rebooting House of Cards, promising the world to become Prime Minister, and then dancing the night away. We have everything we need to succeed in this country and in Kirklees, except the leadership down in Westminster, and we need to demand that. I encourage you all to support the motion and the amendment to help our residents, help the people, and demand this government do more and do better. But judging by what the current Tory leadership contenders are saying, God help us all. Thank you.
Councillor Lukic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, it's very warm this evening. It's very difficult to imagine what winter could be like. We'd all better hope it's a mild one. Because, you know, cost of living emergency, don't disagree, it is a cost of living emergency. Don't see what declaring it, but not actually putting in any actions that we're going to do, apart from writing to the government. I think it's a bit patronising. I don't see what it does to actually help people. There's talk of things like warm banks. It's that bad with energy prices. For example, opening up local buildings, public buildings, so people can go there just to keep warm so they don't have to heat their homes in winter. Why isn't that in here if there's a cost of living emergency? We need to do a lot more than this. I won't be supporting it. The VAT. I used my council-issued device to double-check the cost of cutting VAT by 2.5%. £18 billion a year, 18 billion. So supercars can be 2.5% cheaper and other luxury items. Makes no sense, doesn't help as much as we could be helping with £18 billion. Why nothing in here about fuel duty or, say, zero rating VAT on energy bills? How much more would that do to put £18 billion into that? So I can see this for what it is. It's a cheap shot at the government. I won't be supporting it. And if we're going to declare a cost of living emergency, we'd better be telling the public what we'll be doing to actually help them at our end. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try and put this into some kind of context, and I'm going to take it down to our ward level. So who would have thought in 2022 we would be facing a cost of living crisis? And I think every one of us across this chamber recognise there is some kind of crisis at the moment. So be under no illusion at all. As community leaders, as councillors, we keep saying we want to be at the heart of it, and we should be. We're there to help the people of our communities navigate the systems and processes. Particularly, I've named 3, and I know I could go for an endless list tonight, that people are stuck on the PIP and universal credit applications. The other crisis is food, money and debt management. We've got the winter pressures upon us, and that'll be here in no time, so we're going to have the heating and the lighting. And people are already telling me they can't switch suppliers because they're in debt to an existing one that's charging too much. They can't get out of these contracts. And I don't want us to forget about, we constantly mention about the unemployed. Think about the working poor out there. We've got good, hard-working people now that are presenting themselves in my community, not only at the food bank, but we're also doing the bread and butter project. And when it was set up, it was initially for 80 people to subscribe to it. It's oversubscribed. So what could have been a couple of weeks for people coming and getting stuff, it's now on a 4-weekly round. So if you bid into it and you're accepted, the next time you get something could be 4 weeks. The reality is, we need to keep focused on this because we're always talking about hard to reach people and luxuries and what people have. Internet access is crucial. That is one of the luxuries our local people will lose because they can't afford the connectivity bills. I'm talking about the reality of business failure, which will be on the horizon, and the reason being is also about the energy. And Councillor Cooper did mention about ideas for energy efficiencies. I do believe all of us in this chamber need to get together and come together with collaborative ideas in order for things to work. I know this council is doing the best it can. It will help and support people as much as it can for stability. It will help business as long as it can, but it's only short term. We do need to lobby the government and find another way of doing things. And if you remember, 4 years ago, I stood up in this chamber and I said, I was tired of being told we need to cut our cloths accordingly. And I did say that we've been left with rags, and that absolutely destroyed me. Things haven't changed, it's got tighter, we're getting pushed into tighter corners, and I still have people in my ward with bereavement poverty, with 2 and 3 members of their family that have died and they couldn't afford to bury them. They are in debt. The £1,000 government grant does not cover it. I've still, as I said, got them queuing out the door for the bread and butter project, but I think we do want to support our most vulnerable here in Kirklees, And Kirklees Council is doing the best it can, but it's not a bottomless pit. It's not being given any funding, and any funding that is being given, don't be under any illusion, it's just there. You're scrambling against other councillors, other organisations to get that money. So there's a tight deadline, and then when you've got it, it's a tight deadline to spend it. I want to give props to the third sector out there and the voluntary sectors and the charities out there. The work that they are doing is phenomenal, and we can't forget about them. We're going to need them. We managed through the pandemic with working alongside people and collaborative things. I really think that we need to put it into some kind of context. I want to talk quickly about homes. That's a luxury nowadays. Having a home is a luxury, which is a disgrace. The amount of people that are getting served their notice with Section 21s, being asked to leave for no reason, not because they're in debt or anything, they can't make the rent that it's going up to. So it's easier to evict than to keep them there. I just want to give a big shout out to the local welfare provision in the council. They are working tirelessly. I'm referring people through daily, and I've got to say the food banks and LWP have been at the heart of the things I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I was about to stop you there, but you just finished on time. Thank you. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do feel it's very unfair of you to have me follow Councillor Scott after that, but there we are. I was a welfare rights worker in Kirklees for more than 3 decades. When I started, having left the Department of Health and Social Security, I was really gamekeeper turned poacher. I saw lots of poverty. I'd go into a house and walk on the joists because they'd burnt the floorboards. I'm not seeing that yet as a ward councillor, but I'm seeing things pretty close to it now. There's been a huge erosion of benefits over the years. When I was first a welfare rights worker, unemployment benefit, as it was then, actually acknowledged how many children you had, and you got an allowance so you could actually put food in the mouth of each child. It's now a blanket sum, much lower proportionally now you have to manage on as a family. I also remember prescriptions when they were free. I don't know what they are now. I remember them introducing, it'll be all right, it's only a minor charge, 25p. £8, £10 I'm being told now. As a pensioner, you see, I'm free now. There are lots, absolutely. There are lots of impacts that have built up over the years, and it's not one government's fault. It's happened, and we've all let it happen. I think in the past, working families were isolated from some of those challenges on benefits. I don't think that's the case now. Working families are finding those challenges on their doorstep, are finding that they have to apply for help and benefits that they never did before, no matter how hard working they are. COVID has helped this become a perfect storm. For some people, that's meant the loss of employment. It's meant debt for a lot of people. And a lot of people experience very low wages currently. And we all know the rise in prices. And I was listening to something on the radio yesterday, working families, a lot of nurses, talking about the struggle they had to pay nursery fees. And were actually working hard, full-time, and it just about covered the fees for the nursery for their children, and they were praying for the day the kids were old enough to go to school. There are a lot of disabled people, people with long-term conditions, who can't be working hard to achieve a better income. They're stuck facing these rising charges and also the limited income that they have. I'm really so sad that so many families are now in desperate straits, and I'm particularly sorrowful that the funding that we had from government, that we used in Kirklees to provide vouchers for children with free school meals during the holidays, has run out. and we haven't got that money to provide it now. And I ask all of you, what world do we live in where families panic that the school holidays are coming, particularly the 6 weeks, and they worry how their children are going to be fed? I don't know what the answer is. I think lots of comments that Councillor Cooper made are things I am absolutely sure this council needs to be looking at, as with so many things that we are looking at and doing. But I think lobbying government is something that we are absolutely justified and responsible to do. To stay silent would be wrong. And as for public transport, when that comes back into being public and not for profit, that will help with prices and travel and transport for people who need it. I can only support this motion and its amendment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support this declaration of an emergency. And it appears to me, Councillor Watson, it's obvious from your speech that you've never experienced hardship or poverty. And it feels like you're totally out of touch with the majority of our residents. I'm being told by residents every single day that they can't afford to get to work. Some of them who drive during work hours or drive part of their business or employment, they can't afford to continue in their jobs. People are struggling to put food on the table, and it's not just low-income families who are being affected. I'm talking about middle-income families, and I read somewhere that anybody who's got a less of an income than £100,000 a year is being impacted on by this cost of living crisis. We've done a lot of work in our ward to mitigate against this, but we've set up food cupboards where businesses can donate and people can just take food. We've got a food bank. We've got a bread and butter scheme where people can buy for £7, £30 worth of shopping. It's all oversubscribed. It's not enough. And this is what our residents are telling us. This is why this needs to be emergency. But this isn't just about now. What I'm really, really worried about is the onset of winter and the impact of the cold it has on elderly people, on disabled people and vulnerable people. People don't realise, but cold causes death. And I have no doubt that this winter, if something isn't drastically immediately done, we will see an increase in excess mortality over the winter months due to people not being able to afford heating. Now, the council has taken action and sent information out and leaflets, and we are trying to target our elderly and vulnerable people. But again, it needs government action. It's not going to be enough. We can't do enough on a local authority basis to oversee this this tragedy that's about to happen in a few months' time. I mean, we don't feel it now. We don't need heating now, but it's soon as the winter months start, if elderly people aren't warm, it can trigger all kinds of illnesses like heart disease and lung disease and wherever. We are putting them at risk. Well, this government is putting them at risk. And I'm also really concerned about the adult social care market. The cost of living is impacting on their costs. It's impacting on staff who have to drive from home to home. And this is alongside the labour shortages that we're experiencing in adult social care, and alongside recent increasing COVID outbreaks as well. And for this reason, I support this motion, and I urge everybody in this room to get behind this, because we've got to do what we can to save lives.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Mothers.
Thank you, Mayor. So I rise to support the motion. A lot of what we needed to cover has been said, but I do need to talk about a few other things. So, for example, it's a crying shame about this motion. It's a real lived experience by our residents. It's not about holding hands, but helping and supporting, and that's what your local councils do. And we are stepping up to enable our residents through this cost of living crisis. And moving further, I do agree with Councillor Cooper with a lot of things he said. So I'd like to talk about a raft of initiatives across the council which are being rolled out given the government's constraints regarding funding. So let me say, we've been retrofitting. It's a Labour policy of insulation nationally. We have had solar panels, which was a government scheme, and as soon as we get that money back, we will be doing that again. We are looking towards subsidised transport through making sure that we have reliable, cost-effective transport across our district. We are always looking at elected members to come forward with ideas. We are very good at working cross-party on, say, for example, our exemplar in the waste strategy. We have put together the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We are renewing our fleet towards moving towards more electric vehicles. We are greening the infrastructure in relation to highways and open spaces. So to say, yes, we can always look sideways. It's a good example to learn from what's happening elsewhere. Sometimes we need to talk about all of the things that we are involved with within the funding constraints. So I'm proud to be the Cabinet Member for Environment, and we are doing all of those things across housing, across our open spaces, across our highways, and so back to helping our residents. All of these things will help our residents. And I forgot to mention the Huddersfield District Heat and Energy Network, which will enable our ring road, the businesses within our ring road and residents with cheaper energy and other sources. So I think we are doing well, but we need to, and we have stepped up, as Councillor David said, just precisely how much this council is doing, and it's delivering, it's making an impact. At our ward level, you have heard Councillor Scott, Councillor Khan, Councillor Kendrick talk about some of the initiatives we are involved with, making sure we are there for our residents. We are here because of them. It's not about holding hand, it's supporting them through this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I always feel that the longer these amendments and motions are, the more you can possibly tease out things that you fundamentally disagree with, I'm afraid. And I'm not sure that either the motion or the amendment actually achieves a great lot. And while I'm very sympathetic to the issue we're talking about, as I'm sure everybody is, really we should be in the business of trying to put down things that are going to help people and try and make a difference. The 4 bullet points, for instance, in the amendment, the first of all, the reduction of VAT, well, yeah, I mean, it's laudable, and I'm all for cutting taxes to enable people to spend money on their own families, but it's not a very targeted way of doing it, because it's not leviable anyway on essentials, and it's not levied at 20% on household fuel. we've already heard that pensions triple lock has already been reintroduced. And Councillor Watson forensically emphasised this in his usual way. Writing to the Secretary of State, I'm not sure he's going to achieve very much. Lobbying in the LGA is a much better role. And I was there 2 weeks ago doing just that on behalf of Kirklees, talking to the Secretary of State, actually, as was, to say that, Kirklees will face pressures as well under cost of living. We're bound to see wages rise. We're bound to see the minimum wage rise quite substantially, which is a good thing. But we need the help to pay for that, and I was urging the government at the time to help us with those extra costs. So yeah, lobbying is great, but let's do it in the right place and let's make sure we try and achieve something with it. So we can be very sympathetic to the problem. The problem is we all have different solutions. And so bringing a council motion which puts down one set of solutions and then having a lot of speakers which say those are brilliant and another lot which says no, they don't work, doesn't get us very far. I think if I were leader, seeing this motion, my approach would have been, let's not have a motion at council so we can all talk and we can all have a good pot shot at the government or whatever we want to do and actually achieve very little. Why don't we take it off the council? Why don't we take it off the councillor chamber and actually talk among the political groups? Maybe a leaders' meeting, maybe set up a working group that can actually dig down as to what the council can do to help people with their cost of living. Because that's why we're here. It's to discuss how the council can respond rather than can we write another letter. I'm not sure that this motion is going to achieve much, and I'm afraid as such I'm not going to support it. It's not that I'm unsympathetic at all to the cause. But our decision and our vote as to whether we support a motion or not must be based on, will it achieve something for the Kirklees residents? As such, I'm sorry, but I don't think this will. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think a lot of what I was preparing to say has already been said, to be quite honest. I mean, write a letter to someone, declare an emergency. Doesn't really mean anything, does it? You know, it's not going to help the people of Kirklees. Again, I agree with Councillor Hall. You know, we're all sympathetic to the hardships that people face, but you know, we've got an authority that can make changes to people's lives. And we talk about writing letters to people. You know, the Labour Party, you know, all we hear time after time is encouragement to be a victim. The nasty Tory party, not giving people enough money for heating or for food or for anything else. You know, all this free stuff, we hear it time after time. Free prescriptions, free broadband, free meals, free whatever. Well, there's no such thing as free anything. You know, this is from the same people that think we can close down the economy for a couple of years, but there'll be nothing to pay back. There'll be no consequences. Councillor Khan talks about people being impacted on £100,000 a year. You know, does she really think that people on £100,000 a year require assistance from the government or from this authority? You know, the mindset's all wrong, I'm afraid. I've got a lot of sympathy with the...
Councillor Smith, Councillor Khan? Couldn't hear you. What did you say? Okay.
Anybody on a household income of less than 100k is going to be impacted by the cost of living.
Can I carry on? I'm not sure I heard anything different from what I actually quoted myself there. So somebody on £99,999 may be impacted. Okay, we'll quibble about the pound. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to understand where all this free stuff's going to be paid for. We need to understand where the money comes from. So it comes from the same place that the money that the government spends come from. It comes from the same place as VAT collected on all purchase comes from. It's basically money collected from us in tax, the taxpayer. So what we really need, and I'm pleased that people have spoke about the leadership election in Parliament. I'm pleased that people have actually listened to what's going on in the Conservative Party. I know that people on this side of the room hate the Conservative Party and everything we stand for, but actually that doesn't bother me in the slightest. There's an honesty, there's a debate we need to have about, what the role is of government within this country. Do we really believe that the government knows best how to spend our money for us? Do we believe that somebody in Westminster or somebody in Kirklees knows best how to spend our own money for us? They take money off of us and then dish it back out to their pet projects. That's not how it works in my world. And so we come back to the same problem again. We just have a Labour Party, yet again, complaining about issues without any solutions. So if we all paid less tax across the board, and that includes VAT, and I am very firmly in the belief that we should lower taxes, we all have more money in our pockets. We would all benefit from the economic benefits. So, do we want the state to tell us what cars we can drive, what food we can eat, how many times we can go on holiday? I don't want that to happen. And I just don't believe this debate. I think it's just completely, this is what we get in Kirklees every time the Labour Party start banging on about the Conservative government. The people of this country resoundingly reject socialism. They have done all my life. We got a Labour government, but it was only mimicking Conservative policies. So let's be honest about it. We know that the Kirklees Politburo is never going to accept the Conservative Party in Westminster, but the majority of the country want a Conservative government, and that's what I believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the cost of living crisis predominantly caused by high inflation, outstripping wages, benefit decreases, recent tax increases, it affects us all. It's not just poorer households, it's students and people my age. Community, charitable organisations, vital services and businesses. So I'm going to try and make this realistic to me and how this affects me as an individual. So every day I wake up, I used to fill a car full of petrol tank for about probably £30. It's now costing me £50. That's probably less than half the tank. And then going to dropping family off because the trains aren't running, the buses aren't running, people are on strike because they're not being paid fairly. And then I've got to think about my food, so I'm making my food at home, I'm thinking, this is how much it's going to cost me, and it's gone double to what it was. I come to work, and I find discussions going on in the office, and there's people there to tell me that they can't fix certain items or certain leaks in the home because they're too strapped for cash. I have a student that works in the office who's doing a vocational course as a health professional, trying to save lives, trying to work in mental health services, and she or he is going to come out with a debt of £27,000 minimum debt. And that's her serving for a public health service. I hear someone in the office saying, I'm walking to my appointment because I don't want to take the car, and I know it's healthy for me, but that's the only choice I have. But it's really far, it's probably 40 miles away. And I wouldn't usually do that because my health's really bad. So I travel down the road during my lunch break, I go to the local shop and I buy some food ingredients, breads, milk, eggs, you name it, the basic food items. It usually costs me a certain amount. It's now doubled. So the end of the week comes and I'm thinking, right, okay, I'll travel to the shop, to the local shop, local businesses, local investment. And I speak to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper goes, my shop's going to close because I can't afford the energy bills. And that shop's probably been around for about 20, 30 years. And I think in this chamber, I mentioned that story before, that his risk of losing his income and his family being potentially homeless as a result of the fact that his business is now closing down. So then I may have some events to go to, so I try and walk it there, but then think it's too far. I might take others with me because it's environmentally friendly. And I'm going and I'm thinking, the next time I need to fill this car up, can I go that extra mile on that orange light? Can I drive that extra mile before it starts blinking? And then I'm thinking about the property ladder. I'm not even on the property ladder. And then my neighbour tells me that he's been made redundant. So he's the sole breadwinner. He's got young children. His wife's obviously in ill health, so can't work. And I forgot to mention the impact this will have on people's mental health. It's absolutely ridiculous. The increase of the effect of this crisis on children, as well as the parents and families, is ridiculous. In fact, in the Independent, children self-harming has increased as a result of cost of living crisis. And if you look at the UK Parliament website, the suicide stats, and we are one of the most deprived councils in this country, the deprivation areas, from 2017 to 2019, there was an increased rate of suicide during the cost of living crisis, at that time, 14.1%, and that's double the rate. So when you talk about we should be looking at solution, we should be looking at resources, we should look and find ways to kind of deal with this, you need to invest in the council so they can do the job. If you don't put the money there, and like you said, Richard, nothing's for free. So, like many people, they might have their lives managed, housing, health, jobs, everything's cushy, as the youngsters say. But what about me? What about my generation? About future generations? And I don't deserve to be in that situation. I would like the same luxuries as some people in this chamber have been afforded. So I will fully support this motion this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Joe Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, much has been said about energy bills going up 54% in April, but come October, they're predicted to go up 60%. That is nearly sort of 100% increase in just over a year. You've got they're predicting the average bill will be £3,600 a year. We've all heard the phrase heating and eating bandied about, but there will be some that won't actually be able to even do that. Councillor Khan in her speech talked about the cold killing. As a nurse, I've looked after people that have had hypothermia. I've nursed people that have died from hypothermia, and I really hoped never ever to go back to this. You look at what this Tory government has done, they could have told the shareholders of the energy companies to actually take the hit. When the French government can say you can rise it by 4%, our government says, nah, we can just carry on with that. It's been mentioned by some about people wanting freebies. Most people don't want freebies. The pensioners in our country have worked all their lives on the lowest pension in Europe. Don't they deserve something better in their retirement where they can actually be able to afford to shop, to actually live in warm homes, not going back to the days when pensioners used to go to shopping centres because it was warm and things like that? Yes, we may all be getting a £400 windfall tax, but that's this year. What happens next year when it's gone up? It's gone up again because it won't drop back down to the prices that is there now. and I would urge everybody to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. I'm going to close the list after Councillor O'Donovan, and also Councillor Hawkins, you've already spoken once on this item. Good try. Councillor Bamford.
If we want to help the residents of Kirklees, why don't we stop putting the council tax up for every year? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bamford. Councillor Bolt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very interesting is this, we are now debating, because it's been accepted by the Liberals, the Labour amendment. It's not a composite, it's an amended motion. So, Andrew, your motion ceases, is no more, and is like the dead parrot. So, Mr. Mayor, looking at what we are debating, and I'm reminded of others who've been in this chamber, such as Heather Small from MPeople, who sang in this chamber, "What have you done today?" No, I won't copy it. What have you done today? Well, Mr. Mayor, we're debating a Labour motion, seconded by the leader of Kirklees Council. Perhaps, Shabir, you should learn from the leader you ousted about leadership. Because when there were issues when David Sheard was the leader of the council, he didn't turn around and tell people to write letters, Mr. Mayor. He set up a meeting where all parties, and I think John Lawson, you came down, Sheardy went, Andrew Cooper, and I represented the Conservatives. We went and sat with a minister. That's a leadership, Shabir. So maybe you should start leading and not following. What we're talking about, and you reflect that, as many have said, the council takes minutes but loses hours. And that's never been more true, Mr. Mayor. Again, I reflect on this, that the Liberals are accepting this, we're told. Now, the original motion had several outcomes which we were asked to consider and support. One of them was to set up a cost of living emergency summit. That appears to be absent from the motion we're now discussing. So what we get, instead of having a summit or conference, bringing all sides together and discussing things and working forward, the council requires, and I look at the legal team, can this council require the cabinet to do anything? We can't instruct the cabinet, it's self-governing. We can ask, we can request, but we can't require it, Mr. Mayor. So we're not getting the summit that's in the outcomes. What we're getting is that it'll require them to continue to work in partnership, which the council, and we've had this before in reports, the council will work with people. It won't do things to them. So you're doing nothing that you haven't already committed to doing, Mr. Mayor. So one thing that they could do, and unfortunately I couldn't find it on my phone because Councillor Bamford spoke so succinctly, but I remember, Mr. Mayor, Labour leaflets for the last election saying vote Labour and we'll give you £600. Well, Shabir, if you give mine in a, I'll take it in a cheque if you want, I'll trust you that they will. That's what you could be doing. We had Councillor Mather reflecting on transport schemes and about how they were helping. And again, these were schemes which previously were ridiculed and dismissed when Robert Light, who had been Deputy Chairman of the Environment Agency, spoke about the Huddersfield scheme and about the need for greening, as it's now being called. Peter McBride dismissed it. If we're talking about helping people, how are the delays which we're now seeing on Leeds Road for people trying to get in and out of Huddersfield really helping? Shabir, as someone who for 30 years has lived and brought your family up in Huddersfield, how can you be happy with all the delays that we're seeing, which are not going to be just for the 48 weeks of the A62? We're going to be getting Transpennine Route upgrade coming on the back of it, And then we're going to see the Cooper Bridge scheme. How is that helping the local economy? How is that helping people's pocket? If you were leading Shabir, you'd have said, right, we need these schemes. They're good in the long term, but what can we do to mitigate them? And a suggestion to work across party, and you'll be Googling it as you're going on now, is why not emulate what you're seeing all the other leaders doing and have, even if temporary, a park and ride. Have a shuttle bus running up and down Leeds Road so it's getting cars out so people are not stuck for half an hour or more on Leeds Road. Mr. Mayor, rather than instructing the Chief Executive, as this was proposed by the leader and one of his cabinet members, why wait for council to do it? If you were so keen on this, Shabir, why didn't you say, Jackie, I've got a great idea, write a letter for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bob. Councillor Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start by just saying the reason that over the years we've had to increase council tax or put that rise up to residents is because the government assumed that we're going to do that in our financial settlements. They put us over a barrel so that we have to do it, give us no choice in order to raise the funds that we need to keep essential services running. You can't take 200 million out of this council over 10 years and not find money somewhere else. The government know this. They failed to give us the money through mainstream funding, through our core financial settlement, because they know that we're going to go to the public for the settlement. They make us do it and they put it over the barrel. So I hope that clears that up. It's not that simple. Nobody wants to put council tax up. Police, fire, local authorities, nobody wants to do it. We want a decent settlement from government that fully funds and resources every single local authority to do the vital things that they need to do. We don't want to go to the public to have to do that. We shouldn't need to. Now, my life's crossed over a little bit today from my professional to my council. In my professional life, I do work with parents, particularly dads, around bonding and attachment and how to be there for the children, how to understand when children are crying or when they're acting out or when they're quiet, when there's something not quite right. And the advice and the theory that we always give to parents that are in distress and they're struggling with kids that are obviously struggling with challenges as well is we say to them, look, the voice of the child is that you be stronger as parents, that you be wiser, that you be calmer, that you show leadership, and that you show time and you are available for your children in times of crisis. And what we've seen over this last couple of weeks in terms of government and local politics is something really similar. At the very time when local people up and down this country want a strong, stable, wise, thoughtful, connected, available government, we have a government in chaos, a government in absolute chaos who have imploded at a time of national crisis. And it is an emergency because we've seen a cost of living and inflation at rates never seen in this generation. This is a time when the government should be together, should be united. I couldn't believe it when I heard Boris Johnson say, I'm going to stay on as leader for a little bit longer, but we're going to make no new changes. Thinking this is the time to make new changes. This is not the time to close the doors to new changes. This is the time when people need us. And the government have been found wanting on this. And actually what we're hearing tonight is that this is deeper than just government, because what we're hearing from Conservative councillors across here is that actually what we've got in this motion here is pretty pointless. They're giving us no hope. Writing to ministers, hopeless and pointless. Well, do you know what? That's democracy, and we have some hope and some faith in democracy. We should be able to lobby and represent what we need as local areas. I don't want to hear that it's pointless. I want to hear that there's some hope. Write the letter. Let's hope. Let's have our fingers crossed that it might strike a chord. It's really positive, Councillor Hall, that you spoke to Michael Gove at the LGA conference the other week. I was there as well. I didn't get a chance to speak to Michael Gove. He's since gone, but I do hope that he's managed to get some of your messages across to government. My worry is he probably hasn't. So whatever you said to him might be lost, really, and that's a worry as well. So I really want the government to do a lot more. And I think it was Councillor Lukage and others mentioned, what is this council doing to address the cost of living crisis? Well, you know what? Read it. It's on the papers in there. It was passed by Cabinet this week, last week. It's on those papers. If you look at the papers, they're going above and beyond the call of duty with the resources that they have to help people through this crisis. But what we really need, as in the motion that I'll be supporting, is the government to do more, because they've got all the cash. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Donovan. I just want to remind members that this is a composite motion before I give Councillor Martin the right to reply. Councillor Marchington? Okay. Marchington, right to reply. Sorry.
The members, it's their motion, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Bolt.
Councillor Bowles, you are right, but there has been an agreement prior to the meeting that they would be in a position where the Mayor would use this flexibility to allow Councillor Marchington the right of reply.
It wasn't a private meeting, Martin, it was the all-party briefing, so you did have representatives there, so... Yeah, fine. Okay. Thank you, members, for all your contributions this evening. They are most appreciated. Sorry. For all your contributions, because they've made me think about what you said, and hopefully it's made us all think. Thank you, Andrew, for bringing up the point about the insulation and the renewables. It wasn't in the motion, and I think there is an opportunity. I mean, we certainly have plans in progress about revised form of the recharge scheme, and looking at how we might do that as well. I think one of the reasons it's not in there is when we do work on things like that, it's not always acted on. So we've heard about things that could be, heard about. So I think there's work to be done on that. I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting about, we're all wanting more actions and not words. And I think we should be. And there's an opportunity. There's still an opportunity for that part of the motion to be taken up and get councillors and voluntary and community sector organisations, the unions, and other people involved, stakeholders, to talk about that. There's still the opportunity to do that. Some of the other things that I agree about is I do agree with Councillor Smith, Richard Smith, that we do need to understand where the money's coming from. And that's why it worries me when we just talk about having a blanket cut in taxation. It's interesting that Council all referred to a forensic analysis of what's going on. So I'd just like to point out that VAT is charged on petrol and diesel, and actually if VAT is reduced on that, then actually there's a flexibility that will work for everybody. That the analysis about the £600 is for every household, not just the richest, but every household. VAT intake has gone up by £31 billion during the crisis, so actually using £18 billion of that to go directly back into people's pockets is a really good thing to do. I also worry about this thing about a forensic analysis about, no organisation has ever taxed themselves into becoming richer. I am being selective about it, but honestly so. Out of the top 28 countries that are richest per capita, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Finland, none of those countries are renowned for being low tax countries. Even the beloved France, they've got a really low tax country, haven't they? People per person in France are better off than we are. The country that can control the prices of energy. It's interesting that the two taxes, the things that were criticised, the energy price cap was introduced by Conservative government. Oh, right, we don't like that. And then the national insurance increases. interested by the last but one Conservative Chancellor. And that's what we're talking about, policies, blanket policies that have not worked for the people of this country. So yes, we do need to be looking at practical things, and we do need to be getting central government to give us the resources we need to be able to deal with that and meet the needs of local people. Why an emergency? And I do have something, I don't like crisis after crisis, emergency after emergency, because, and I think that's why I included that word in the motion, the original motion, because the storm, the greatest storm is still to come. There's an opportunity for us to do practical things now at a local and national level to protect the most vulnerable, because in 3 months' time, there are people in this country whose energy bills, gas and electricity, are going to go up by £1,000, £100 a month. And there's things we could do now to mitigate on that. I do wish we could go back to a sensible discussion on it. It's a bit sad when Ken Clarke, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, he used to be Secretary of State for Education, so I'm not too fond of him, said what every government should be doing is making sure that the most vulnerable are protected and acquire the resources to do that fairly and effectively. This motion is just a start. It's a commitment, hopefully from most of us, not just to talk, but to act. I hope everybody can see the way to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. We're now going to a vote, and we're going to go through all those in favour, and those against, and those absent. So we'll start off with those for. Thank you. Those against. Those abstain. That's carried. Thank you. Yeah, we're now going to have a 15-minute break, because I definitely need one. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Hall.
Mr. Mayor, on your discretion, that we move forward items 11, written questions, 12 and 13, please, to this point of the proceedings.
Thank you, Councillor Hall, for that. I'll just put it to a vote. So who seconded that? Councillor Taylor. Can we move that to a vote? All those in favour, sorry. All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Sorry, I do. Sorry, fault. It's the heat. Sorry about this, guys. Item 8, page 11, minutes of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. To receive for information the minutes of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The minutes are here for noting. Are there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? No. No. Okay. Item 9, page 21, corporate safeguarding policy, reference from Cabinet. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And because the opposition seem to think that the next two items are really not that important, I will be as quick as I can. I rise to move that the recommendations of Cabinet, as set out in paragraph 7 of the report at page 25, be approved with regard to corporate safeguarding. And in doing so, I want to stress how important it is that there is a corporate safeguarding policy which ensures that children's safeguarding and adult safeguarding are not just left to a few services and officers from the Council to implement. Safeguarding, as has been said many times, is everybody's business, not just within the Council, but in our partner organisations and our communities too. The corporate safeguarding policy is part of the Council's policy framework, and there needs to be a cross-council recognition of this responsibility. And indeed, it is a key strategic theme throughout our Kirklees Council plan. Therefore, the Corporate Safeguarding Oversight Group will have the responsibility to ensure that this happens, that this is communicated to all, and that appropriate training is given to make corporate safeguarding everybody's business. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, point of expression of interest.
I just want to pick up on what was said by Councillor Patterson, because she said that the opposition felt that this wasn't an important issue. I'd like her to come and explain on what basis she thinks this was not an important issue, because certainly that is not the view of my group. So, as a point of personal explanation, we are supportive of this policy. We will be voting in favour of this policy, but we have never given any indication anywhere that this agenda item wasn't an important matter. So I don't understand how she can stand up and have the gall to make that allegation. So I'd like her to substantiate it, please.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Patterson.
Mr. Mayor, I'm glad to hear that.
Is that seconded? Councillor Kendrick, thank you. Councillor Watson. Sorry, Councillor Kendrick.
Second this, Mr. Mayor, just by saying if there's nothing else you do tonight, colleagues, you rip out pages 44 and 45 in your document and write down the contact numbers and the email addresses for when a safeguarding issue is raised with you, you know what to do with it. Thank you.
Are there any comments, Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just really to follow on from Councillor Taylor's comments about how seriously we do actually take these issues, I'm going to make some points that I was going to make when we came round to the questions session, but as it appears that holding the executive to account will probably be off the agenda tonight by virtue of the time running out, I think it is important that I raise these points in the context of this report. And the point that I would make is that the report of the independent inquiry, the Telford Child Sexual Exploitation report, which was chaired by Tom Crowther QC, was published yesterday. This report comprises 4 volumes and just short of 1,300 pages, so it's a very thorough and comprehensive piece of work. It shows a great deal of commitment on the part of those commissioning the inquiry and those delivering it to really take a long, hard look at the issues, and most importantly, to learn from what has happened in order that the failings of the past should not be repeated now or in the future. Chapter 3 of the report specifically reports on the Council's response to child sexual exploitation in Telford. And it is of itself, that volume of its own, that chapter, is a very, very substantial piece of work, taking up the entirety of the second volume of what are 4 volumes of the report. And it is, of course, a matter of record that in parts of Kirklees, children have suffered abuse in the same way as in Telford, which causes me to inquire, and I think it is particularly pertinent in the context of this report, whether the Council has established any formal mechanism for the review of the Telford report, and indeed other similar reports, to establish whether there are lessons that can be learned by Kirklees Council so as to ensure that we are doing all that we can do to protect the children in our community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor John Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief comment and question, really, and it's about the telephone numbers on page 44. 1, are they out of hours numbers? 2, are they manageable? Are they accessible quickly? Because there's a incident in my ward recently where somebody was trying to access Gateway to Care, spent 2.5 hours on the line. We've been informed that telephone numbers are an issue in the borough, and I just wanted to know that those are dedicated, those are open, they're out of hours, and I think there's an issue here as well. When we look at the implementation and we talk about where these numbers are available, then we do have an online dependency that we say, right, okay, you can look at these numbers online. If somebody is trying to get us through the switchboard, or trying to report this through the switchboard, how easy as that can be. And these are questions, these are genuine questions that I would put to any scrutiny. I'm kind of using councillor scrutiny here. I do apologise. But that's kind of my comments and questions on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to address the issue that Councillor Watson raised, in that the Safeguarding Partnership Board is looking fully at that, but we also have a gold group, CSE group, that is also looking at it as well. As for the phone numbers, I would expect them to work, but certainly I'm open to a phone call at any time of the day or night if it's a safeguarding issue, as is Mel Meggs. She may not thank me for saying that, but hey-ho.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Right to reply, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Not much more to add than what Councillor Kendrick has just said, but it isn't just the recent Telford report that we'll be looking at. We've been constantly looking at reports about our own experience and that of other authorities since we unfortunately went through that period of time in our Kirklees history. So we are constantly learning, and in fact, we've just had the Ofsted inspection into, can't remember. Into sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation, which I was trying to think of the official word for it. Sorry, Mel. But we've just had that. We don't know the results of that yet, but we are hopeful of a good report on that. So that's, and just finally, just to say, yes, that telephone number is 24, well, one of the phone numbers is our Kirklees emergency number, which is 24 hours, and the police also, besides Mel Meggs, are always available. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. We'll now go to a vote. Show of hands, please. For. Those against? Any abstain? That's carried. That's carried. Thank you. Item 10, page 51, Inclusive Communities Framework. Can I invite Councillor Patterson to introduce the report, who will then receive a presentation from Jill Greenfield, Service Director, Customer and Communities, and Mel Meggs, Strategic Director of Children's Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think it's very apposite that we have got this report here tonight about the Inclusive Communities Framework. We've talked a lot tonight about inclusiveness within council services and within our communities. So I say it's very timely it's here now. The aim of the Inclusive Communities Framework is that across Kirklees, people feel safe, included, and that there will be cohesive communities where all feel that they are treated fairly. That's not, unfortunately, the case now. There are global, national, regional, and local challenges facing our communities. Post-pandemic, the Council and our partners have been on a journey about how we work to support and engage our communities, working with, not to, and in a place-based approach. And we have a limited window of opportunity to ensure we stay on that journey. The ICF, the Inclusive Communities Framework, is a framework, not a strategy, and it replaces the existing cohesion strategy, which is in our Council's policy framework. It will sit, if approved tonight, alongside our other 3 top-tier strategies: Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, Inclusive Economy Strategy, and our Environment Strategy, and will support their implementation across Kirklees communities. That is its strength and its purpose. It's about culture, changing the way we do things. It is about our council and partners who need to adapt their way of working and approaches in communities. Leaders across Kirklees, including councillors as community leaders, can use it to hold one another to account and to demonstrate our collective commitment to inclusive communities. It is a springboard for working in the community. We need to recognise the need to shift from a single lens of cohesion. We need to acknowledge the strengths in our communities, the way they can resolve their own solutions. It provides us with a way to build longer-term sustainable solutions and ultimately better outcomes for communities, an improved sense of belonging, people reporting they feel safer and that they have a voice and are listened to. At the Community Partnership Board recently, the partners agreed to take the ICF through their own governance routes for adoption, and this is the request of Council today, to adopt the ICF on behalf of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Evening, councillors. I'm just going to take us for a whistle-stop tour of the framework and what it actually is. It is a professionally facing document because it is about how organisations, including the council, how they show up in communities and how they actually approach that work. It has been co-produced by partners, and as a framework, it is written to support and wrap around the variety of our partners' professional disciplines, whether that's police, our health partners, or our contact centre staff. We will produce alongside here an accessible version and will also offer briefings and support to explore and understand what the ICF sets out. What really holds the ICF together, the Inclusive Communities Framework, are the pillars. These pillars were co-produced with partners, and they are what Kirklees partners have told us from our own local best practice, of which there is a lot of very good practice across Kirklees, and from what we have learnt nationally and from other partners about what are key to building inclusive communities. And that is that we believe in community strengths, that we are active in building trust and promoting belonging. No, this is an active intervention. This is something we actively have to do. And importantly, the third one is that we care enough about our places and communities to take action. And those pillars are what all of our partners have said are the things that will hold how we do things together. The ICF really provides a toolkit to support partners based on what we know, as I've already said, in Kirklees and wider, to change the way we work, how we do that collectively across partners in Kirklees, while still having the freedom to work in their own policies, their own processes and strategies about what is relevant to their role and what they are required to do. The toolkit supports with building and sharing of knowledge and practice. Partners know how to do things, are supported to do them, and they know what good looks like. That is the key, one of the key sections of the toolkit. That they actually understand the Kirklees way of doing things, how they embed and adopt the 5 inclusive approaches which are set out there and in the document with examples from Kirklees and wider good practice around connecting, communicating, equalising, trusting and celebrating. That there is continuous learning, that we keep on learning about what works, and not only do we learn it, we put it into practice. That we measure impact. We are asking ourselves and partners, so what has changed because of this? So we have, in the Inclusive Communities Framework, a basket of indicators and a self-evaluation tool. This, again, wraps around existing organisational measures so as not to slow down their own processes that we all of us already have in place. And early feedback from council teams who've looked at this, they've really valued that approach. There is also a self-evaluation tool and a self-evaluation score from organisations will inform the ICF and will be key to implementation. There is high support and challenge, and that support will be made available to organisations through the first period of implementation, and we will utilise our partnership networks and resources to make sure that we can advise and support, offer targeted briefings that are all again relevant and proportionate to the roles and responsibilities of individual organisations, that we will be able to evaluate the overall progress made by partners, given oversight of the distance that's been travelled, make recommendations to partners, other partnership networks and strategic boards. Again, we'll capture and share that learning, and importantly, it will help us make the most of all of our resources across the system, reduce duplication and build on our place-based working approaches. I'll just hand over now to Mel.
You'll be pleased to know this is the last slide.
So thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mayor. So we are really excited about the opportunities that we think that using this framework will give both us and our partners, and I'm assured that it will really provide that springboard that we need to do to learn from COVID and to work differently in our communities. I'm particularly keen on the framework because I think that it has huge potential to think about how do we help, you've just had the corporate safeguarding policy, how do we help to ensure that vulnerable children and vulnerable adults are safe in communities, and the most inclusive communities are those who care for those who are most vulnerable. And actually this will really help us to understand about how do we wrap our communities around those who are most vulnerable. It takes a village to raise a child, and I think this inclusive communities framework really helps us to think differently about safeguarding. It's not just about an individual's responsibility, it is about communities being responsible. We can't do this, and I think Telford is a really good example actually of if we were working in this way, then we would have a very different approach, and also think about how we might use the assets in our community to better safeguard children, because there are plenty of assets there for that. I think the role of leadership across this council and our partners is going to be key to effective implementation. We're going to need to think about and work collectively to work differently. We're going to need to be supportive and challenging of each other to do better, and this gives us a framework that enables us to do that. We're going to have shared measures which will enable us through the Communities Board to absolutely challenge each other to do better. And in fact, I've had a recent conversation with the Department for Education who want to come and talk to us about our schools, and I've been able to say to them, we have an inclusive communities framework. If we're going to make decisions about what's going on in our communities, we would expect you to work with us as part of that. So it's not just about how we call each other locally to account, but how those who want to come in and make decisions about Kirklees residents and Kirklees lives, how we hold those to account as well. And the framework gives us the ability to do this. So I think it's really exciting that our council teams and our partners have been, this has generated a huge amount of interest and energy, and we need to build on that momentum. We cannot take our foot off the pedal while we've got people in a place to think differently about the way we collectively do things. It's really important we build on that into implementation, and that we do that collectively. This shared enthusiasm for the framework has seen partners already signing it off and agreeing to take this on. And so our request obviously of council today is that we adopt this framework and start to work together with our partners differently for the benefit of our local residents. Thank you.
So thank you, Jill and Mel. Can I now move that the contents of the the contents of the Inclusive Communities Framework as recommended by the Communities Board be noted, and that the Inclusive Communities Framework be adopted and included within Article 4 of the Council's Policy Framework. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second and reserve the right.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Are there any comments on this matter? Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. However, I stand here today to say I'm quite disappointed. And I'm disappointed because this went through scrutiny, and the changes that were recommended by scrutiny have not been incorporated in the report. So we're being asked to approve a report today that doesn't include the feedback from scrutiny. So I do wonder what we're actually, are we saying this is right and the scrutiny feedback is not that relevant? Or is the scrutiny feedback important? Therefore, if it hasn't been included, does it invalidate elements of this report? I've had the opportunity to hear people talk to this framework probably on at least 4 occasions, and I still am none the wiser what it's about. It is written in an almost impenetrable language that I understand every single word in it, but when I put them into sentences, I struggle to understand what the sentence is actually saying. And that's not just me saying that. That was another member of the scrutiny committee that looked at this with me a couple of weeks ago, made that point. And I hear that this is a framework and not a strategy, and I've heard that in a number of meetings, yet it's actually been described as sitting alongside our other 3 strategies, and it is one of the 4 top-tier strategic documents. So I say to you and go, is it a strategy? Is it not a strategy? If it's a framework, what does that mean? When you read it and you look through it, there are huge questions around what there are words, but I'm a big advocate of place-based working and place standards. People know that. But I'm just going to read you a little bit. It says, place-based working involves meeting people and communities where they are on their journey, whether this is emotionally, mentally, physically, or geographically. So it's not only about where we are in Kirklees, it's about where we are in our lives and where we are in relation to each other. We all want to live in places where everyone can trust each other. And I've read this so many times, and I try and relate this back to either place-based working or place standards. And I'm sorry, it's just words. It doesn't explain to me what will be different once this is implemented. And there are other examples. We're told that this toolkit is for leaders, managers and teams. Now, I'm not the brightest spark in the, whatever it is, the matchbox, but I'm sure I'm not the dimmest either. And if I struggle with this, will some of our frontline teams actually understand what the Scooby-Doo it's about? And I do wonder, we asked at scrutiny, when this comes before council, can we have a prefix to it that is set out in plain, simple English that explains it? They agreed to do that, but it's not here today. I have no doubt that this will get voted through, but I'd question how many people actually genuinely understand what they're voting on. And I would genuinely question how anyone could tell me how this has impacted in their community in 12 months' time. Because I'm sure if it wasn't implemented, we'd still be all doing the great stuff we do in our communities to support and help our communities. And yet we've got this really big document that is incredibly dense and difficult to read and understand. Some of it I certainly feel uncomfortable with, but that's my political philosophy. There will be other people who feel entirely comfortable with it. But this should be about how we make a difference in our communities. And it is very difficult to work out what it is that will change if and when this is ever implemented. So I'm sorry, I won't be supporting this. I've tried my hardest through various meetings to try and get that point across. And I've obviously admirably failed because it's here today. And I feel sorry for the people that are going to be voting in favour of it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Smedge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sorry I'm using my electronic device because I can't read my handwriting. Okay. There were several recommendations that came out of scrutiny, and I realise that the time frame between scrutiny, cabinet and council was very tight. And as chair of scrutiny, maybe that is something that we need to look at in the future, so that such a big item as this does not have so tight a timescales that recommendations cannot be considered fully in the time frame from scrutiny. And I think that is a lesson that we should discuss. There were several recommendations from scrutiny, and I had hoped that there would be a reply to those specific recommendations in the following reports. The specific actions weren't in the reports from there. following that. So just to give everybody a flavour of what was discussed at scrutiny, we asked for the language in the framework to be made more accessible for communities. The reply that we've had is that a draft community-facing ICF commitment explanation document can be included in the web-based version. I think that scrutiny would have liked to have been able to debate that as to whether the web-based version and the actual, what's going in Article 4, do you know what I mean? This is what I'm saying about the tight timescales. We also discussed about more emphasis on positive stories, and I think it's good that there will be some more. You've indicated there will be some more positive case studies, and we talked about a balance of case studies. It needs to be clearer how communities will be brought to the decision-making table, and you've said that that will be in the implementation plan. And about not engaging, people having busy lives and not wanting to engage all of the time. And I think that you are looking at how that can be achieved. And that the clarity was needed on the wider engagement. But more focus was mentioned about action. Action as part of the care pillar. You all saw the 3 pillars on the screen. And action being part of it, not just the framework, but actually actions. And I was still hoping for more on that. Okay. So ensure the implementation plan indicates action focus, and I think that's really important to help people understand what this is. Because with it not being a strategy but a framework, people need to understand the difference. Okay. And I would ask that if this is approved tonight, that implementation plan that was discussed at scrutiny and is part of your response to the actions, if that implementation plan and these discussions can be held at an early opportunity in that process, so that scrutiny has an opportunity to feed into that process. Okay, hope that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Bolt.
I'm concerned with what we just heard. This has been to scrutiny. Undertakings were given or intimated that changes would be made before it came to council, and we're hearing that those haven't been made. That's a worry as somebody who sits on scrutiny, Mr. Mayor. It's a worry how much we actually value that. And it's a worry actually that the report is called Inclusive Communities when we're not being inclusive to all parts of council. In order that this can be inclusive, could I please ask the Cabinet member to defer this to allow the comments of scrutiny to be incorporated into a report which we can all then hopefully accept. It's pointless going forward with an issue where the scrutiny members and other members of the council may feel, is it such time critical, Mr. Mayor, that we have to do it today? Why wasn't those elements included? So I would invite the leader or the Cabinet member to give the council that opportunity, defer it, bring it back, and I'm sure by that time my colleagues will be able to hopefully have some confidence and second it and we can move it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt. Councillor John Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On seeing the presentation, thanks very much, by the way. It was very informative. Brought some of the issues that I had together. I have a question, which is, if something walks like a key discussion, and looks like a key discussion, it's probably a key discussion. What is it doing here in an HEA meeting? Now, I understood that this was the pattern for the meetings through the year, alternate meetings. This is actually taking up a lot of the HEA meeting to discuss something that belongs in its own separate meeting, and in its own key discussion meeting. That aside, I do have a couple of questions. They are the usual ones that we see with this kind of report. So, what measures of success are we using? Excuse me if it's in the report, but I had the same problem as Councillor Taylor here, which was my eye just kept glancing off it. There was a lot of quite dense language in there that seemed, it was not clear. It was not plain English. If I was a member of the public, I'd have no chance at all. I mean, I did get the flavour of it, and in general, I am in favour, but it seemed like what we were trying to do was raise the sea level so that all the boats could float, and that's a big task. We haven't been consulted at a group level. I would have expected something this large to have come to group, so that is another disappointment that I would add to the ones already expressed. Some of the positivity that was mentioned earlier, I think Councillor Smage talked about positive language. In the pillars on page 52 in the summary, we believe that communities hold solutions. Now, somebody's been peeking at the Liberal Democrat preamble to the Constitution, because that's exactly what we believe in. That's exactly what we say. And that is why we won't be voting against this today. So you've earned yourself an abstention at the very least. Point 2, building, belonging and trust. Now, the second half of that sentence is celebrating what is good in local places. I would have preferred to have that as the lead, because that build, belonging and trust suggests that that belonging and trust is not there at the moment. We can all point to instances, but building it from, and it sounds like that from scratch, we're trying to reinvent the wheel. Well, actually what we should be doing is keying into what's already there and celebrating what's already there. And number 3, the care about what matters. If we don't already, then I would suggest that our problems are bigger than what this is going to fix. I do have a couple of more points. I think really the other point that I'd concentrate on is the risks that were on page 58. There's one kind of mystifying one it's just a statement really, which says leadership and accountability are directed by siloed budgets. And I think that deserves an explanation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed Councillor Taylor said he feels sorry for anybody voting for this tonight. Please don't feel sorry for me. I'm quite happy and confident to vote for this tonight. Councillor Smage, you had to use an electronic device. I think you should celebrate that. I feel you're down with the kids if you're using electronic stuff. I'm writing with a pen. This document, this framework, is for organisations, partners and services. It isn't for the public as such in its current form. And I suppose greater understanding of it might well have happened if we've been part of the design circles that have developed this, the design circles of services, partners and organisations who built this saying, yeah, that's what we want, that will help us. The framework sits alongside the 3 strategies as a tool to assist them to be more successful, which is why it's not called a strategy. I suppose I'd refer people to page 60 in the papers, and perhaps the paragraph down, where it talks about overview and scrutiny management committee provided comments about next steps and so on. And it goes on to say, this will be incorporated into the implementation plans of the ICF, and a further scrutiny discussion will take place to demonstrate this and report on the progress in implementing the ICF. So I don't think scrutiny has in any way been ignored. I think it's been confirmed that it gets another or even a third or more bites of the cherry. And, you know, the document that will become a public-facing document will certainly be going there. I'm really glad we're on the same page of page 52, Councillor Lawson, about belief in communities, and I hope you will give serious consideration to supporting this. But I'm very happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the issue around scrutiny has been covered, so I won't repeat what's already been repeated. But I'll just go back to last week. We had a partnership conference in Huddersfield called Picture of Kirklees. And the key theme at that conference was inclusion, equality and diversity. And the partners that were there included the NHS, the colleges, third sector leaders, police, and a whole range of other partners. And one of the things that they kept on referring to was the Inclusive Communities Framework. And I just want to reinforce what Viv just said, that this had been a document that's been developed in partnership with all our partners. And we've been hearing time in, time out, not just today, but over a number of years, that we can't do things ourselves and we have to work with our partners. And our partners are really upbeat about this. And I completely understand what you're saying, John, but until I actually engaged and actually spoke firsthand to the range of partners and how fully committed they are in getting this framework implemented. And one of the ways forward was around bringing this to full council, so it shows that we are fully committed in terms of working in the partnership. The framework is something that we can then develop into that implementation plans and strategies. And the way I look at it is it's flexible enough to actually start looking at a locality level. You know, we talk about what do we mean by equality, what do we mean by diversity and inclusion. And that's a debate we'll carry on having in this council chamber for probably many years to come. But the way I look at it is if I have a particular view in my own ward regarding what equality, what diversity and inclusion means, regarding the demographic within my ward, then I can use this framework with the partners to actually focus on the key issues. Similarly, John, if you have certain issues in Kirkburton, the ward you represent, you then get your partners together, then the framework is flexible enough to actually address the issues you're concerned about. You know, so I think I don't want to get too hung up about, you know, has it been here, has it been there, does it do this, does it do that? Yeah, I think the partners are fully behind this, and I want to vote for this. My group is going to vote for this because this is a start, and there will be other opportunities to actually take this forward and actually implement and develop it further. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cooper.
Under council procedure rules, I'd like to propose that the question now be put, that we go to the vote, to allow us to then propose to extend the meeting to allow us to go through written questions and oral questions to the Cabinet. Propose the question now be put.
Extend the meeting till when, Councillor Cooper? Anybody seconding Councillor Cooper's vote to extend? Sorry. Yeah, extend the meeting. Vote to extend. Yeah. To extend the meeting, yeah. Okay. Vote to go to the vote. I'm just saying, sorry.
So can I just be clear, members? It's been proposed and seconded that we're moving to go directly to the vote on this item. So if we can take a vote on that, please, Mr. Mayor, first. And then I think if that goes through and you'll take that vote, there'll be a second request to try to extend the meeting. Is that right, Councillor Cooper? Thank you.
Shall we go to the vote for the first item?
So this is a vote to go directly to the vote on this item.
Yeah, that's carried, yeah. Yeah.
That's carried.
That's carried, yeah. Sorry, now voting to extend the meeting. I do apologise. Vote to approve the report. Yep.
All those in favour?
Those in favour, yeah. So those against? Yeah, this against, yeah.
To be helpful, you are now voting on the report itself. Yes, it did. No, it went through. The move to the vote went through.
Yeah, it did.
And now you're voting on the paper itself.
Yeah. You're voting against it now, those. That's carried.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I'm struggling with the voting tonight because it's not clear when we're voting, and it's not clear that we've had people voting in favour, against, abstaining. If we can do that consistently, we've got a better chance of all understanding actually what we're doing, because we're not getting that clarity. And can we please have that clarity so we're not sat here thinking, I'm not actually sure what we're voting on now.
Councillor Taylor, we did vote for and against on that on the move to bringing the vote forward.
You did, yeah. That's carried.
Does Councillor Cooper now want to make a second proposition?
I now ask that we extend the meeting to allow us to get through written questions and oral questions to Cabinet members, and extending the meeting by another hour.
Anyone second that? Second by Councillor Smith. We're now going to vote for extension of the meeting. All those against? Any abstentions? And that's carried. Sorry, that's fallen.
Can we move to item 13B? I propose we move to item 13B so we can have some holding the executive to the account in this meeting. Written questions will be answered after the meeting anyway.
You need a seconder for that. And you've only got 5 minutes. Because that's at my discretion. We're going to vote on that. For? I don't know. They have against? Abstain? It's fallen. Item 11, written question to the leader, cabinet members, chairs of committees and nominated spokespersons. A written schedule of submitted questions has been circulated. I will now invite members to ask their questions in turn. The appropriate member will respond. One supplementary question to each submitted question is permitted. Question 1, Councillor McGuinn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have been told that Huddersfield Crematorium is not working to full capacity. Could you please tell me when it will be fully operational?
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you very much, Bernard, for your question. Kirklees Council has invested more than £3 million as part of a modernisation programme in Huddersfield and Dewsbury crematoria. New cremators have been installed at Dewsbury Moor, and the site has been operating at full capacity for over a year with no delays to bookings or availability issues. Service times are available at Dewsbury as early as tomorrow. Huddersfield Crematorium has remained open and operated at a slightly reduced capacity whilst the investment programme has commenced at that facility. Current availability at Huddersfield is comparable with before the renovations commenced. However, there is demand for specific service times which may require just slightly longer to accommodate. The first of our new state-of-the-art cremators in Huddersfield began its operation today, and we expect to complete the final refurbishment in September. We're in regular contact with funeral directors at both crematoria and have involved them through a special stakeholder group where we have regular open dialogue about the issues they're facing. In relation to your public comments on this issue, I can confirm that no funeral directors have raised the issue of storage capacity with Kirklees Council.
Supplemental. It was announced in 2020 that any refurbishment of the crematorium would take 20 weeks. We're now nearly 2 years on. Could you please explain what the problem was?
It was done in a phased way, so it's obviously not to have minimal impact on the capacity. We have seen different issues. A significant issue has been the result of the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, which added extra administrative and tariff issues to the equipment that we needed, as much of it had to be imported from Europe. We also then obviously had subsequent COVID challenges. The timescales that we announced most recently were that we were hoping to have it done by October, but we're now confident that we're going to be able to get that done by September.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Question 2, Councillor Armour.
Regarding the proposed new Queensgate car park, it's all part of the Huddersfield Blueprint scheme. What's the recommended route for drivers from Wakefield Road, i.e. from my ward, to access this car park? Councillor Turner.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Bill, for your question. A detailed assessment of car park access options from all directions are currently being undertaken, and these will be agreed with Kirklees Highways Department. A transport assessment will be submitted as part of the planning application to set out and assess the access proposals within that planning application. It is also anticipated that visitors will use alternative car parks around the town centre, such as Springwood, depending on their direction of travel. Along with planned improvements to the rail network and bus station, I would also anticipate a significant increase in the amount of people who would use public transport to access the town centre.
What provisions as part of this grand scheme for car parking, what are the provisions for blue badge holders, people with reduced mobility?
I can assure you that in line with government guidance and the rules we operate within Highways Department, that disabled people will have sufficient car parking places and access will be sufficiently for those people to access those people. We would not leave the disabled or anyone behind, not this council.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
Okay, shall I go on to number 3?
Question 3.
Yeah. Thank you. This is down for Councillor Firth. And what consideration has been given to how Greenhead Park can be more closely integrated with Huddersfield Town Centre?
Thank you, Councillor Hammer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did ask Harry Potter if he could move it a little bit, but it's even beyond him. I will give a response. I think I know what's behind it, but I've got a long response, so you'll have to be patient. The use of Greenwich Park, as well as our other wonderful spaces, is key to our vision for the town's future. We understand that it is important to think of them as a whole and to make sure that people can move about to enjoy spaces and events as freely and easily as possible in a welcoming environment. We have made significant investments in Greenhead Park already and are continuing to invest through initiatives such as our Playable Spaces strategy, a recent refurbishment of our Conservatory Cafe, and a well-developed events programme, as you all saw last weekend, by the way. Our events team are working on ensuring that these events also maximise opportunities for our town centre businesses. Plans to improve the connectivity of the park with the town centre are being progressed through a series of emerging projects as part of the development of the transport strategy. Initiatives to achieve this include our Huddersfield Station Connections programme of works, funded by Wicker's Transforming Cities Fund. The proposals for the Trinity Street crossing will significantly improve the infrastructure for walking and cycling, to improve connectivity and accessibility between Greenhead Park and the town centre, to the bus stations and the train station, and provide links with a wider walking and cycling network. These link in with the significant improvements of the bus station, train stations already carried out on Westgate, and are complementary to the investment in Huddersfield bus station and a massive investment in Huddersfield rail station as part of the Transpennine Route upgrade.
Just supplementary, Mr. Mayor, just really a comment. What's behind this question?
Sorry, Councillor, we're at 9 o'clock now, so I'm now going to close the meeting so everybody can get back home as well. Thank you very much. The meeting is now closed. Thank you. Close, finished.